Hello and welcome to Innovation Unlocked by Matheson Squire, an intellectual property powerhouse, bringing you the top insights into inspiring inventions and booming businesses and how to protect them. I'm your host, Andrew White, and today I'm joined by Joe Warren, founder of PowerVault, a SME in the Cleantech sector.
Hello.
Nice to meet you, Joe.
Likewise.
Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. So I spent the early part of my career working in the data center sector and looking after computers and making sure they're all running, both technically and in terms of the power and the cooling. And I faced quite a lot of challenges getting access to enough electricity and also keeping all of the computers cold. There were constraints in the network around our data centers and power cuts and other problems like that. And I started to get really interested in clean technology like solar panels and wind turbines. This was back in 2003, so there was almost no solar or wind on the grid at that stage. And since then, I spent the last 18 years working in the clean tech sector, helping to bring a number of different technologies to market.
Wow. And how have you seen the sector evolve over that period of time?
It's an interesting question. And if you think back to where we were 18 years ago, we weren't at net zero. We weren't thinking about net zero. We were still thinking we could just cap emissions and trade. So we've been on an amazing journey. I think there was less than a gigawatt of wind on the grid when I started. And now we've got tens of gigawatts of wind and solar. We're planning to put tens of gigawatts of wind and solar in addition to what we have already. The grid was quite carbon intensive, so probably around 30%, 40% of our carbon emissions came from electricity. And in the next 5 years, the ambition is to reduce that down to zero or near enough zero. So we're really in the middle of an amazing transformational journey.
Fantastic, brilliant. So I'm always really impressed when I meet founders of businesses, and I'm amazed how you take the leap to do that. How what kind of inspired you to take the leap, and how did you find those initial first steps, those first weeks, months of founding the business and sort of turning it into something?
Well, it's very hard work starting a new company, and I was actually very lucky with PowerVault because 11 years ago, Sustainable Ventures had actually helped to incubate PowerVault. So it's an incubator company that supports early stage businesses. And actually, PowerVault has benefited from a lot of support from people that help early stage businesses, both incubators and investors in early stage businesses. But it's very interesting. It's hard work. There's a lot of things to learn. And obviously, you have a number of different challenges in terms of getting access to the capital that you need to get the business really going. But yeah, it's definitely a very fun experience.
And so let's focus on this challenge a little bit more. So you talked about capital. I mean, in addition to capital, what the challenges were there?
So, I mean, in an early stage business, everybody says in a business, cash and customers are the two most important things. But I actually think there's probably four things really you need to think about. Okay. You need to get that investment in, and that can come in the form of equity investment, but also there's a lot of non-dilutive grant funding. So organisations like Innovate UK and others really want to support innovative early stage businesses, particularly in the clean tech sector. So getting access to that grant funding is really key. You obviously need to have customers, which means that there needs to be a market. People need to understand that there's a need for your product. And that's something that can often trip up early stage businesses. Obviously, the product's really important, a product that's going to serve those customers and meet their needs. And then, of course, the team, the people, the different people in the organisation that are going to help take that idea and turn it into reality.
And so you're talking about the product and the customers. Did you find that it took a little while to kind of get that product market fit, and sort of did the product change? Did you realise that the customers changed, or were you quite clearly set from the outset as to what it would be?
Yes, I mean, I think the market's matured a lot, obviously, in the last 11 years, and it's often the case you start off with the early adopters who are just enthusiastic and passionate about the technology and almost as much as you are, and maybe they're willing to pay a little bit more for the product. And it's no secret that the cost of batteries has fallen exponentially over the last 10 years. So we've seen, the cost of the inputs to energy storage products fall a long way. I mean, I should also mention exactly what PowerVault does. So the concept is a battery that can be put into your house and store energy from your solar panels. And increasingly these days also take energy in from the grid when electricity prices are really low, and then store that energy for future use. So over the period of time that we've been operating, the cost of the product has fallen, but also the opportunity to charge that battery up with things like smart tariffs has obviously grown a lot in that period of time as well.
Yeah, I mean, just anecdotally myself, I know friends who've, have their own, I don't know if they're PowerVault products, but they have their own sort of Powerwall type products where they've got battery storage at home for their solar panels. So, definitely seeing that large adoption in the market of these technologies. So in the early days of trying to raise finance, what did you find that first of all, sort of, how did you make that first step? Did you have sort of some seed capital? Did you have savings that you were, bootstrapping yourself? And then did you then do a seed raise or like sort of what happened there? And then what did you find that investors were looking for? And was it different when it was different types of investors, angels versus VCs and so on? So
that's a fair question. So in the very early stages, the business was bootstrapped by Sustainable Ventures. So there was some initial capital, and we got a great grant from Innovate UK that paid for the first year's worth of work on that. And then we did a crowdfunding campaign, a number of crowdfunding campaigns to effectively get angel investment in to the business. Over the years, we have raised money from some larger institutional investors as well, but predominantly PowerVault's been funded by angel investors and high net worth investors. And we've had amazing stalwart support from those investors through that whole journey. So I'll probably say, it is important. Intellectual property is something that all investors will want to look at, and both the patents, but also other things like trademarks, and then also the general sort of know-how and the other knowledge that the company has built up over the time it's been trading.
And so just, obviously, we're an intellectual property law firm. So just to touch on the IP side of things, did it, my anecdotal experience as well, it's like, some angels it really matters, some angels it doesn't. And also I think there's a bit of a sector difference as well in terms of, whether, for example, if it's a SaaS platform, I think sometimes there's a conception that patents matter less than other sectors. Did you find that was your experience as well? Did some investors care more about patents than the others? And was it, how much scrutiny were they paying to those patents? Were they actually sort of looking to see what they covered, or were they just like, oh, yeah, great, you've got some IP filed, we're happy?
Yeah. So I think in the early days, patents were hugely important. And it's probably fair to say, as the company's evolved, we spent 11 years putting different energy storage systems together. We're on version 5. So we've learned an enormous amount. And there's a lot of that sort of embedded knowledge and expertise in how to make it work. It's not necessarily patented.
Right.
But it is something which, as you accumulate that experience and that knowledge, effectively, that becomes part of the company's intellectual property, but more intangible rather than a tangible patent. And then obviously we also have some trademarks as well as patents, which are good for protecting our brands, which have also grown over the 10 years.
And so sort of in my own experience of working with startups, I find the interplay between trade secrets and know-how and confidential information and then the registered rights patents, a really interesting one and a really important one to consider, because, you've got to be mindful of what you're putting in the public domain, but also ensuring that you're not, if you're releasing your product and it's easily reverse engineerable, for example, you can't rely on trade secrets. So there's obviously that delicate balance. Did you find that sort of over time and with your experience of sort of doing the patenting process and sort of being involved in the IP process that you got a better understanding of how to manage that interplay between the different types of IP rights, and it kind of led to you keeping certain aspects of the technology secret rather than putting them in the public domain in the form of patents?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There's obviously that trade-off between effectively disclosing everything when you issue a patent and keeping that information internal and secret. One thing that occurred to me as you were talking is a lot of the services might be in the cloud now, so we don't necessarily put the technology into the product, and therefore it's much harder to reverse engineer it. And some of that, the artificial intelligence and machine learning that we do is built up on data sets that are also not available to the customer. So it'd be harder for that to be replicated, or competitor, for example. So we have a technology which we call Smart Store, which was actually developed, we started to develop it in 2016. And it's been continually evolved, and I think it was launched in 2019.
Okay.
And it's been continually updated. And through that period of time, we've collected more and more information about the way people normally use energy, and how batteries respond, and so on. So effectively, we've got a rich control system there based on that machine learning and AI, but it's all based in the cloud. It's not inside the product.
And so you can keep it secret, which is
Yes.
Perfect, great. Being sort of involved in the IP process, is there anything that's particularly surprised you that you think actually, if I was to turn the clock back to the point where I was founding the business again, I would have done things differently? Was there any lessons learned, anything that was sort of unusual that you picked up on the way, or?
I suppose one thing that I think is important for small businesses to think about is that there is some leeway in terms of you can manage the costs of your patent portfolio by slowing things down sometimes, or you might want to speed them up to try and get a patent granted faster. I believe if you've got a patent on a green technology, you can sometimes get it accelerated.
Yep, that's correct. Yeah.
So there are things that you can do to manage that cost and think about how you phase the different patents that you want to get granted, both nationally but also internationally. It's possible to sort of manage those costs, and it can take a very long time to get things granted. Sometimes it's convenient to allow things to take their course rather than trying to speed them up.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think if something's still pending, gives that uncertainty to third parties, right? They don't know for definite what that claim scope is, what the patent definitely covers. It also gives you a bit of wiggle room if the product's still in development and you haven't quite sort of finalised what it looks like. The patent, you've got a little bit of leeway still with the patent if it's still a pending application. So, but then it's nice to have a balance, isn't there, with some granted patents. So to investors and third parties, you've got a strong patent portfolio, but some flexibility still with the applications that are still pending. So.
Yeah, it always feels really good if a patent gets granted. It's like a really nice feeling. So
you don't have one of those
happy.
Trophy walls, do you? Or
we don't, but I have been to some companies that do.
Yeah. Okay, good. And so how do you find the cleantech sector in general is evolving? What do you think what's it going to look like over the next 5 years, and what are the big challenges?
I mean, it's a very interesting time. As I said earlier, we're on a transformational journey, really, from a grid that was mostly coal and gas-fired power stations, and nobody really thought about electricity very much, other than just consuming it when they needed it. And what we're seeing now is a huge deployment of wind and solar. We already have tens of gigawatts on the system, and plans to put another 50, 60 gigawatts on over the next 10 to 20 years. And that's going to mean that there's suddenly far too much energy sometimes. Other times there'll be much too little. And I think what we're going to therefore see is the need for more flexibility and in the system. And that flexibility can come from a number of places. Obviously, batteries, like the ones that we sell at PowerVault, very important. There are also grid-scale batteries, but other things are becoming flexible. Electric vehicles, heat pumps, other loads inside the house, heating loads inside the house, and also inside businesses. So we're going to need to be developing more assets which can absorb that low-cost electricity when there's too much.
You touched on vehicles there. I mean, I've had some experience with vehicle-to-grid technologies as well. Is that something that you see is going to evolve, or do you think that I remember sort of 5 years ago people were talking about this. Has there been as much take up of that as you might expect, or has that been a bit of a slower adoption?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, it has been quite slow to adopt, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is about how the car interfaces with the grid. So actually, if you want to send energy out of a car into a home or a grid, the technology for that's quite expensive. So effectively, you need to convert the energy from DC energy in the car to AC energy that needs to be synchronized with the grid. So I think that's possibly been a bit of a barrier, because that would add cost to the car potentially, or to the charger. I think also there's a question about battery life and about who gets the value. So if you're going to be making a lot of money by discharging the vehicle into the grid, and that's going to wear the battery down. Is it the car manufacturer that takes the value, or is it an intermediary, or is it the homeowner? I'm sure we're going to see more vehicle to grid in the coming years, but some of those questions have not quite been worked out yet fully.
Right. And does it differ when it's on a non-domestic scale as well, when it's sort of more industrial scale, not necessarily vehicle to grid, but with sort of battery storage and, I'm thinking of like factories, warehouses, that kind of stuff. Is it similar problems, similar solutions, or is it a different issue for those?
Are you thinking about fleets of vehicles, or are you thinking about large batteries?
Fleets of vehicles, large batteries, lots of machinery that might be very power hungry at certain times of day, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things to think about there. One is obviously more and more businesses are electrifying their fleets, so there is potentially going to be an opportunity there to use those to provide what we call demand side response, which is reducing charging, but then also potentially for vehicle to grid in future. I think a lot of businesses are very much thinking about how they can use the vehicles to be vehicles. So they'll want to make sure that those vehicles are charged up, ready for their next shift. In terms of industrial and commercial businesses, so although we built batteries for the home, we've also installed batteries in a number of small commercial premises, farms, schools, and factories and so on. Interestingly, for a couple of reasons, there's perhaps been slightly less of an opportunity there, because a lot of those businesses don't really consume that much energy in the peak, which is normally between sort of 4 and 7, whereas a homeowner will. So there's a bit less of an opportunity to be rewarded for avoiding the peak.
Oh, really interesting. So just sort of going back to sort of the early days of founding the business, we talked about sort of some of the challenges that you encountered, and one of them was investment and product market fit. What other challenges were there?
I suppose within the sector, if you think about the Cleantech sector, against the backdrop of wanting to reduce carbon emissions, there's also the fact that fossil fuels are really cheap. So it's very difficult to persuade people perhaps to sort of invest money in what could be a slightly more expensive way of generating energy up front that might save them money in the long term. Now, we talked a bit about the costs. The cost of batteries has come down, as I said, exponentially, but actually the cost of solar has also come down an awful lot over that period of time. And we're now at the stage, in 2025, where if you've got a bit of money and you've got a south-facing roof on your house, you really must get solar and storage. It's a no-brainer, and you will get a good return on that investment in most circumstances. And that was a lot harder to say 10 years ago when the cost was much higher.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the main challenge early in the business was just that we hadn't gone down the experience curve, and therefore the cost of these technologies was more than it is today.
So how do you see the future of the sector and innovation in the sector? What's on the horizon over the next sort of few years?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So on the battery side, we've got batteries are really interesting because there's loads of different chemistries, and inside the battery there's an anode and a cathode and a separator and an electrolyte. So there's a huge amount of technology innovation going on within lithium-ion batteries, which are currently the front runner, but also new technologies like sodium-ion batteries, what they call solid-state batteries. So and other technologies, other chemistries like zinc, for example. And there's a number of things driving this. So one is to try and reduce the cost further, but then there's also to try and make batteries safer, basically, to increase safety of batteries. So there's quite a lot of innovation in that area. Actually, in the latest version of our product at PowerVault, the P5, we've got some new innovations, safety-related innovations, which can help to make the battery as safe as it can be. These are the kind of technologies that can now be fitted into battery systems.
Oh, brilliant.
And then taking a bit of a wider step, in terms of the next sort of 10 to 20 years, it feels like we've nearly decarbonised electricity if we achieve the ambition over the next 5 years. But in the longer run, we're going to need to decarbonise heat. So about 50% of our carbon emissions currently now come from heating our homes and businesses. And that's a big challenge. And then in the longer run, we're going to need to also remove carbon dioxide from the air, which will probably be done quite possibly in a large part by electricity, but there's other technologies as well. So there's quite a lot of of new innovation happening in those areas.
And when you say removing the carbon dioxide from the air, do you mean like direct air capture devices or other technologies? Or?
So there's direct air capture, but there's a range of different technologies. There are some more organic technologies which use a process to capture. So they're more, they're still clean tech, but they're perhaps not on the kind of electricity side. But certainly there's a lot of innovation happening in direct air capture, as you've mentioned.
Yeah. Now, I've had some experience myself in that sector, sort of with anecdotally with the XPRIZE people involved with that, and it's inspiring to see what's going on in that area, and hopefully there will be some commercially available solutions available soon. Brilliant. Well, Joe, it's been lovely speaking to you today. Thanks so much for coming along, and thank you.
Thank you.